Short secret. I never gave your way though.
No, you won't.
Are you sure?
Yes.
So we've got Caroline and Matt starting today.
Sure,
Trying to pass it out something. So we've got it's the last week of February, so the last week on this project. And next month we'll start a new project, which I think I might talk about. Yeah, I'll do a quick recap of what we've done this month, and then I'll do a demo. So really drawing people. So the first week I was really just sort of suggesting like heads and torsos, and I just talked a little bit about drawing in some sort of guidelines through maybe the middle of the features and eye level, and just a little bit of structure before you start to refine the shapes. So that's that week. Then the week after that, looking at drawing full figures, and it's pretty much the same sort of ideas. Try and perhaps draw almost like an imaginary skeletal form or stick man, the inner stick man first, and then work out the work out the shapes after that. So that was the second week. Last week I was encouraging you to work with tones, lights and darks. So we did had a go at charcoal and drawing lights and darks. So we started actually using that photo, and Izzy's doing a really good version of that. And I was suggesting you might want to start by perhaps working upside down. And sometimes that can help you to see all the abstract shapes, the lights and darks, in just an abstract kind of way. So that's that one. And I thought this week I'll just add a little bit of colour. So I'm going to stick with the pastels and the drawing materials. Do a bit of that in a minute. And then I was thinking for our next project, I'll probably do some oil painting demos. So the next project is working from the masters, or looking at the masters. So it could be maybe the most straightforward way to work would be perhaps a copy of something. So you could pick an image and then make a copy of it, and that would be a way of, it's a good way of learning different approaches to painting and drawing, and it's a way of investigating how artists put their paintings together actually. So when I went to art school many years ago, that was one of the things that we used to do, is to maybe go to the National Gallery and draw, and you can, and I think some of the students actually did paint from some of the paintings in the National Gallery. So that's always a good way of learning to draw and paint. Another approach might be to perhaps use a painting as a bit of inspiration, perhaps use certain elements from it, perhaps use the composition or the style of painting. So that could be another way, perhaps pick an artist style, or colour palette, and perhaps apply that to an idea of your own. And similar to that, you could perhaps pick a painting and maybe do a different sort of version of it. So over the course of the month, I'll do a number of demos, but to start with, it will be like a copying demo. I've got, in terms of resources for all that, if you've got any books of your own, that would be great. I've got quite a lot of these little kind of images, these cards that I've got given once. So these that's like a David Hockney drawing. There's a bit of information on the back. So these are quite a nice resource. With the different images, there's only like one of each. So if there's a couple of people who want to use the same one, then I can then scan them and print them off. So if there's a particular one that you like the look of today, just pop your name on these little sticky notes and stick it to it. And then if there's a couple of people that want the same image, I'll make sure that there's enough copies for everybody. But if there's just one, you can buy the actual things. But because I've got 4 classes, I need to sort of make sure there's enough resources for everybody. But if you've got your own ideas and your own art books or anything that interests you, or you'd like to find out a bit more about, that that'd be great if you've got your own sort of thing. Okay so far? I'll get you back on. Yeah, so something to have a think about for the next few days. It doesn't have to be very complicated. You might want to just do a bit of drawing from something. It could be just as simple as that. Okay, so going back to this, so I thought rather than start a whole completely new image, I might as well just use one of the demos I've started. So I use this one today. So So using pastels, so these are quite good little pastels. They're sort of like a reasonable quality pastels. They're not the most expensive, but they're not the cheapest either. So I think a box like this is probably maybe 12 or 15 quid, something like that. And you've got about 60 different colours. They're quite a small size, but that's quite nice in a way. They're quite usable, this sort of size. So these ones are Maple Inscribed. So I always think these are quite a good ones to get. Some of the ones in the cheap shops, they just come out a bit too pale. There's just not enough colour in them. So I think these are quite nice. And then you can, if you're really into pastels, buy the artist quality ones that might be a couple of quid each. Something like this, if I was going to draw him, I tend to try and start with maybe like a mid-tone. So for me, there's a slight yellowy, obviously it's difficult to describe what the skin tone would look like. But it's got a slightly yellowy feel to it, so perhaps start with something like that kind of browny colour. With pastels, I find that it's good to have a bit of scrap paper that you can test the colours out, because sometimes they look different in the box to how they go on the paper. And I also, in terms of getting naturalistic colours, I tend to overlay one over another and mix them. So this paper has got a little bit of texture. These are like a paper blender. It's just like a rolled up piece of paper sharpened. And I can use these to just work that into the grain of the paper. And it gets that evened out a little bit. So usually when I'm drawing pastels, I'll perhaps try and get a first layer of colour down, and then I'll then work into that. So that can be that. I think I'll go a little bit lighter. That's a little bit warmer. That's probably going to be too orange, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's much orange. Yeah, maybe I'll go for something like that. And mix it on there. So really the mixing is very much done on the paper. Something like that is just too bright on its own. If I combine that with the yellow, and then perhaps a sort of creamy colour as well, hopefully I'll get something that's approaching the sort of colours that I've got there. Like that. And the bit inside these glasses is slightly darker. I'm going to try for a brown in there. And around here. Again, that's a little bit too dark, so I'll need to work that in and lighten it up a bit. In a sense, I'd rather go a little bit too dark than too light, because I can then draw the lights into it to an extent. And a little bit of shadow around here that I've missed, so let's pop that in, kind of around here. And once I've got a little bit of colour everywhere, I then would work into, just work the colour up and work in some shadows and details. I've actually made his nose a bit too far that way really. It's going to come in here. Lock in for his hair. The nice thing about these is you can make a mark like that, just a square mark, or I can use it on the side and use it like a big paintbrush, or I can get a finish line or just use it on the corner or the edge. So they're quite versatile that way. His hair's quite dark, a little bit of black. Well, again, just work that in. Yeah, so that's using these. And then you might come to a point where you want a little bit more definition. And I've got a whole range of pastel pencils here as well. So a lot of these I got given, but it's probably quite good if you wanted to use pastels and pastel pencils. I think a good combination is maybe like a black and a couple of browns, and perhaps a white, and just buy these individually because these are a few pounds each. Sometimes you get a lovely range in these boxes, but as you can see, some of these have just never been used. You're just not really going to need that whole range. When I bought my own, I tended to just buy one or two pastels at a time. But these are great for getting into little areas like, it'd be quite hard with the chunky pastels to get these shapes and finer edges, something like that. So that could, yeah, much easier to control. But if I was trying to get this whole area with these, I'd be cross-hatching for a long time. So I like the chunky ones for bigger areas, really. So a little bit darker there. And maybe work that in a bit. And probably a little bit of a reflection on these glasses. So let's try and find a pale grey. Perhaps wants to go a little bit lighter still. So. Yeah, so it's mostly mid-tone and then working darks in and then lights. That's how I tend to approach them. They're quite a nice medium to use, very instant colour. The downside is that they're really easy to smudge and damage and hard to transport and hard to display. In terms of preserving them, any that I've got that I want to keep, what I tend to do, you can either spray it with something like fixative or hairspray, which works quite well, but it does tend to make the lights a little bit darker. It dulls down the light areas. Sometimes what I've done is I've got a spare sheet of paper and just stuck a bit of tape here and then just folded that over, and that just stops that happening. You don't want them sort of, the abrasion really. So that's one way of sort of preserving them reasonably well. Some of it will come off on the paper, but it protects them fairly well. So that's a little bit on pastels and adding a bit of colouring. Any?
What was the pen thing you used to shade it in a bit?
That's
What did you put the first?
that thing.
What is that? Sorry.
It's I think they're called something like torchons or something like that. It's basically like a bit of paper that's been rolled up and then sharpened. And they're pretty inexpensive. These you can get from the cheap shops, like like the Works or something like that. They usually come in a set of a few. And it's a good idea to just have a few and maybe keep one for darker colours and another for lighter colours. Once they get a bit mucked up, it's hard to get them clean again. So sometimes I've sanded them on a bit of sandpaper, but it's easier just to have a few really. Which nowadays I just do that. But they're actually quite nice because you could do it if you haven't got the pencils. What you can do is like put a little bit of pastel down somewhere and pick a bit up, and then you could draw. To an extent, you can use it to draw with, or you can get some quite interesting lines and marks if you do use it to draw with. Probably different sort of marks than what you'd achieve with a pencil. So they're quite nice. I never used to like these, but I've kind of really grown to quite useful. I used to just do all my blending with my hands, but these, you can sort of blend just little tiny areas and push the pastels around with these. So they're quite a handy tool. Yeah, pretty inexpensive when you get a set of group. You're welcome to try any of these, any of this lot, and yeah. So yeah.
Paul, if you've done a portrait or painting in pastel,
Yeah.
and you wanted to keep it or frame it,
Yeah.
would you have to put glass in front of it, or can you frame a pastel painting without any.
Yeah, I think really you need to put glass in front of it. Yeah.
You've got to, yeah, or you should.
Well, if you want to, if you want to preserve it, I think the trouble with like anything paper, it's like anything paper. It depends if you put glass on, because you find it will just pick up pollutants from the atmosphere, or flies all land on it and leave marks and all sorts of things. So, just from that point of view, anything on paper, unless you can varnish it, and I don't know if you can with pastels. You might be able to spray varnish it, but generally people put them behind glass. Yeah, put them in front of the glass. Yeah, the one or two I've framed, I've just always put them behind glass. Right. Okay, I'll let you.